Well, when Rick and I started building coaches, our first two Yellowstone coaches in 1979, we started in the back of this shop. I have a post here that my rubber tire machine is on, and it goes up to a beam that I have this hoist fastened to. And across this area here, we had a curtain, and everything we did was behind this curtain. We didn't have access to this whole shop then. So these double doors weren't here at that time, but basically from here back was our shop. And this is where we built two 8-passenger Yellowstone coaches that kind of got us off the ground floor. Well, I remember there was a point through that winter that we would stand at this curtain, both Rick and I, and we'd look at the front of the shop and think, what would we do with all that space? And as we looked forward, this was full of tractors and swathers and balers, because it was a machinery storage shed at that time. And prior to this being a machinery shed, it was a mechanic shop for the previous 40, 50, 60 years. And I think there was maybe 2 or 3 4-foot fluorescent lights in here, nothing along this wall, and if I remember right, the grease and grime on this floor was at least an inch thick. It had to be. We scraped and we scraped and we scraped. We could not see the concrete floor from all the years of grease and grime of being a mechanic shop. Well, there were 3 families that were involved that bought this building and turned it into a machinery storage shed. And they moved all the equipment out at another location. And so we would look at this as an empty spot and just try to fathom, what would we do with all this space? It's almost comical now, because you can see what I've done with this space. And it is crowded. And so then we fast forward another 15 years or so, and I am full here, and the building next door became available, and it is a 30 by 65, where this shop is 30 by 90. And I remember looking at that, thinking, what could I do with all that room? So at that time, there wasn't a hole in this wall. I had to go around on the sidewalk to gain access to the other building. So in the late 90s, I cut this hole in the wall and framed it up with steel. And those of you who have been here to visit have walked through this partition that I have now to the other side. And this side used to be the original Joliet drugstore building. The building next door to this was a hardware store, and they were using this as an overflow storage space for the hardware store. The roof on it was bad. This was all a wood floor, which was bad because the roof had leaked forever. So I bought this as a wreck. The back wall was falling down, literally. It's a stone wall. It was caving down, the roof was caving in, the floor was caving in. And I bought this building as a pile of junk that nobody wanted. And I redid the roof such as it was. I gutted out the floor. I had a 4-foot hole in the back that I dug underneath that wall, and I have so much concrete and iron underneath that wall, shoring it back up to make the wall stable again. So now we walk into my upholstery room and part supply and shipping supplies. Well, this front wall here we had opened up and made a double door, and I borrowed a side dump beat truck that I could haul backfill into here, and I backfilled it all. And then I brought in 10 trucks of cement, and we poured a concrete slab in here and made it functional. And this was about 93, 94 era. And I remember looking at this when the concrete floor was poured, everything was vacant. looking at all this space going, what could I do with all this space? So as I look at it today, this is what I did with all that space. Well, there were a number of different aspects to the business that came and went during that time frame that I don't think I've ever gone into. But I have ended up with, almost 5,000 square feet of space here that somehow I seem to have filled up. So I'm sure none of you have ever dealt with this dilemma. You probably have benches that are open and clear, floor space that is unused, but I don't have that problem. My benches are full, my floor space is full. I have an undercarriage to this Yellowstone coach that is in my paint room. I've got it primed, it needs to come out, this front axle needs to go in, I have to go through this double doors and my paint room is off to the left. So I find myself again jockeying for space. So I'd like to put the undercarriage back on this framework that has kind of a dolly underneath it. And I'm going to transfer my front axle to my little hydraulic table here so I can have my dolly back for my undercarriage. And I find myself still jockeying for more space. And I don't know if it ever ends. I've been here 47 years, and it's always been this way. If you guys have it figured out, you might let me know. Well, I've got my wheels primed for this 8-passenger coach, and you know, after you prime, you have to sand. So immediately I can hear you out there going, no, no, don't make me watch you sand. No, please. Well, I still have to do it. So I'm going to show you the effect that the primer is going to have on these hubs, which is the most open grain. So first of all, I use a sticky disc that goes on my DA sander, dual action orbital sander. And it is an adhesive backed disc that just sticks onto my pad. Well, this is what I use to hand sand with. And I fold it in half, and what it does is it actually causes a lamination effect and makes this much stiffer so I can sand without a pad. Now, it's not as stiff as if I were to use a pad on a broader, flatter surface or a very gentle curve, but I'm sanding the hub and the spokes, and they need to have a sharper contour, but yet this laminate effect will give me a better surface to sand with, and I can actually use my fingers in a broad sense like this to form my sanding pad similar to this. So we look at the grain in this hub being open grained like ash is. You can see how rough this surface is, and we certainly don't want to paint it in that condition. I would like this to be a smooth surface. So the primer is what's going to help us accomplish that. We should be able to sand the majority of this out. I have some real deep ones here. It may take a second coat, but we're going to give it our best shot and see what we can come up with. So sanding is a nasty job as it is, so I start out with a sharp piece of sandpaper, and this is 80 grit. I'm not worried about sand scratches yet. I want to take down the material as fast as possible and float this grain out. So what I'm doing is I'm going to sand down the high spots and leave the low spots, which is the grain, and that's going to help level this up. So you can see that starting to take effect. Now we're just starting to see a little bit of raw wood, which is okay at this stage. See that wood starting to show up? So now we have a smooth surface that our next coat of primer is going to go on much nicer. So let's go back right here to where it's really coarse and see how much we can get out of that. And see, that's not bad. Let's focus a little right there. I can feel a little bit of that open grain there. Another good heavy coat and that'll be gone. Let's go connect the two that we just did. That's the whole purpose of the first 3 coats of real heavy primer, is to fill in the wood grain from the worst that was right there to what is a little more normal here. But that's what this first step is all about. This rough grain is all going to disappear. So you can see the effect that that primer has on smoothing this out. Another coat is just going to look like it was pretty smooth, almost as if it was just molded. And that's how a lot of these old paint jobs were. You could never see any wood grain. And that's how it was done. You know, there's one thing about sanding, it would make you a really good thief, is eventually you don't have any fingerprints left. So I do switch to using nitro gloves predominantly on my right hand because I'm predominantly right-handed. But it does teach you to become ambidextrous as well. And there's a couple other things that I like about this folded over laminated sandpaper. This edge here doesn't have any abrasive on it, but this edge does. So when I'm trying to get into tight corners, like where the spoke hits the fellies or the spoke into the hub, I do like this round edge to be able to work into that corner. Now if I use this edge like this, since this edge is abrasive, I can leave gouges in the felly. Whereas I'm using this edge, it has less of a tendency to do that because there isn't abrasive particles on this edge. So it's kind of nice to have that curved edge, and there are times when it's nice to have the straight edge, but you have to be careful of the other edge that you're sanding up against because you can leave real pronounced gouges there. And when I'm bringing the spoke into the hub or sanding that corner also, it's nice to have that round corner on this paper. Again, if you sand this way, you can leave pretty heavy scratch marks on the other edge. But there are times that I will switch to this square edge when I'm trying to get up into the corner, kind of like so. So there's times and occasions for either one, but I use this round edge a lot. And because I fold it over and I have that laminated effect, it has nice strength to it. Then when I have all my corners into the hub and into the fellies done, it's a matter of just shaping out the spoke. And Diane does come help me do this in the next step. When it is in this step of doing the sculpting and filling and shaping, I predominantly do this because I know the shape that I want. But when Diane comes in and sands, she's dealing more with the scratches of this 80 grit paper. But I always have impressed upon her or anyone who helps me sand, you never sand in straight lines. You always sand in a circle. When you have straight lines, if you happen to have a scratch that is left, your eye will pick that up. If you sand in circles, you're less likely to. That's why orbital sanders are orbital. It sands in circles. But it's just shaping out the body of the spoke, and these aren't near as hard as that ash hub because hickory isn't near as open grain as ash is. So this goes fairly quickly. I do all the spokes on one side, then I'll shift and go to the other side and do the other side of the spoke, so I don't have to do underneath like this where I really can't see. You do enough of this, pretty soon you just get your rhythm down and do whatever works for you. See, this is where I was talking about my hands become the pad, and they can just follow the contour of that spoke. Pretty exciting stuff, huh? Okay, maybe not. Well, there's no two ways around a lot of handwork in wheels. The only place I use an air sander is on the face of these fellies, and I run a Hutchins DA sander. That does speed it up a little bit. So I've got both front wheels in, but this is the one wheel that was really rough, and I took it down pretty aggressively, and we're going to see just how well that primer filled, and go ahead and finish priming the rest of these wheels just to see the difference. So the primer's still pretty wet. This is where we had that really rough spot, and you can still see a little bit of grain there. And there's a little bit of grain clear around the whole thing. You know, we just sanded this once, so it has filled a lot. We're well on the way of smoothing these hubs out. And the spokes are looking really nice, but they clean up a lot faster. Hickory is much tighter grained than ash is. And this is the other front wheel, and it turned out maybe even a little bit better. We've made a lot of headway on this open porous wood. So you can see it's kind of a struggle for space, isn't it? Getting things jockeyed around. Back room, I still got my Jeep. I got the top two boards of my Piedmont wagon that I need to get in and get those painted. Juggling and juggling. It just seems like it never ends. But I think maybe you can see the dual purpose of primer. One is that thin coat to get it to penetrate, soak in. And from there on, it's to fill this grain and get this smooth surface. It's a time-consuming process. Appreciate you coming along. Thanks for watching.